Well, we are blessed today to have Chris Maurer, who is a professor at the McIntire School of Commerce at UVA, to talk with us about cybersecurity, online sharing, and all things related to those broad topics. We live, obviously, in a world in which we're interacting with the digital all the time. The internet is an omnipresent part of our life. So I thought, Chris, it might be helpful to get started by just getting a lay of the land. How is it that your average person, let's say, is interacting with companies online, and how are they gathering data about us? How are we communicating data to them, whether we realize it or not?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is great to be here. So to answer the question in a hopefully not alarmist way, everything we do is being tracked. Whenever we are interacting with a website, an app, a computer in some way, a data point is being created in some way. So things like how quickly we scroll through a web page, where we pause, even things like where our mouse hovers or where we tap on our mobile phone screen. These are all data points that are being collected and are captured by companies to understand and try to infer our intentions and attitudes and behaviors, in interacting with that. So this spans from, social media to even e-commerce platforms and online shopping. Most websites will be able to track that type of data and capture it for various purposes. The purposes can range from, in a social media setting, to try to feed you more content that you're interested in. From an e-commerce perspective, could be trying to push you more towards purchasing and engaging with that brand or that company more deeply.
So if I'm on Amazon, for instance, and I don't necessarily click on a particular product, but I can sort of hover there for a while, or they'll start presenting similar items to me and this is tied to our IP address, so that they kind of build a profile of us based on that?
Yeah, okay. Without getting too technical, but it is way of tracking back to you as an individual. The one nice thing is that a lot of this data is not always tied back to Chris Maurer, who lives in Charlottesville at this address. So it's I don't want to say that it's anonymized. It's identifiable that the same person is doing these things, but it's not always super personal to me and all of my personal details. Now, there are ways in which, through data brokers and selling and exchanging this data, to piece together these elements and be able to identify, more about who this person is. But honestly, Meta, Amazon, they don't really care that it's Chris Maurer. They care that it's someone that is aged, 40 to 50 with two children at home that lives in a suburban setting.
Right.
And those are the things that they are capturing through both information that I willingly share online and also my behaviors and what I show as an interest.
And from their point of view, I imagine this is primarily, if not exclusively, just they're interested in selling you things and they want to maximize how much you will buy, right?
Absolutely.
So from their point of view, they're not really interested so much in what you're doing as a person or the patterns of people in your household, but they're concerned with how do we maximize selling products to this person so that they'll pay attention, eyeballs on the screen kind of thing.
And I would say, so selling, obviously these companies want to make money.
Yeah.
So selling looks very different in different revenue models with things online. So I kind of phrase it more as they want our attention. And so our attention can be translated to dollars for a lot of these companies. So everyone is constantly competing for attention. I mean, I'm sure you guys can drive around or walk around town and see people constantly on their phones and everything. So everything is a competition for eyeballs and our attention. And so when it comes to Amazon, yes, they want you to spend more time on their app and they will recommend more products and we're interested in those products. We fill up our cart and we spend more money. But other companies, whether it's a media, a news website, social media, et cetera, they want us just to stay on the site. Because when we have those types of products that we're not paying for, it's easy to understand when we pay money to Amazon, we are a customer of Amazon. With social media, we are the product, not the customer. And so they want us to stay on and do as much as possible on these sites so they can amass a bigger data set that they can turn around and monetize and sell to an advertiser. Because that's where the money is actually going to come from. So the advertiser is the customer, and our data is the product that is being sold. So when we're competing for attention, the more that we can engage in those sites, the better Meta's product becomes, because they can then go to an advertiser and say, I know everything there is to know about this user.
Yeah.
You can give them a customized coupon code with a very customized picture to grab their attention and get them to go to your site and buy something.
So lots of companies know about us then, in a variety of ways. Data we give them, but also data they're able to just accumulate based on our patterns and our behavior. And you zeroed in there, I think, on a really important issue, the issue of attention and the way in which our attention is being pulled in seemingly 1,000 different directions by companies and so forth. I know that this has consequences for us as humans, particularly mental health consequences and emotional well-being consequences. What have you discovered in your research or your conversations about how this constant need to have eyeballs on the screen has impacted us as humans?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not trained in that space, but I'm very scared about this, to be perfectly honest. So I kind of started on this journey. My professional background was more in cybersecurity. And so thinking about sharing online and interacting more from a privacy and security perspective. And recently, the mental health side is becoming much more of my attention or focus and interest, because so much of what we do online, we can think of visiting websites and social media as a window into the world, and it opens up a worldview of things. But in a lot of ways, it's just a mirror that's reflecting back exactly what we want to see. And so I think that has profound mental health implications, because we can, when we click on one thing, when we, might read one news story or something, and then all we see is that same perspective and worldview, it really does minimize our opportunity to practice critical thinking and critical thought. And as a professor, critical thinking and intellectual curiosity is something that I really want to, I think is important, and I instill in my students. And so when we are chronically online, it becomes more and more difficult, I think, to break out of the echo chambers or the directions in which we, are being fed, because the algorithms, the social media algorithms, even, mainstream media sites, they want to feed you more news articles that will get you to click on them. It can really put the blinders on us. And I think that has some profound, mental health implications over the coming years.
And I imagine we could trace out other implications as well. I want to run something by you, Chris. It's an idea I've been thinking and wondering about, and thinking about my own. I think we're probably about the same age. So we remember a good amount of our lives was without the internet or pre-internet. Yep. And then the internet emerged, and most of our adult life has been an internet-saturated world. I wonder, and I'm curious what you think about this, if maybe the internet itself on net has been a negative as opposed to a positive. Obviously, what is allowing all of this is the existence of the internet, to be able to tailor all of these sites and apps and so forth to people's desires. You talked about mental health, but I mean, of course, what you're also saying is that it creates echo chambers, which lead to polarization, which leads to misinformation, which leads to people thinking that their side, on whatever issue it is always got the right viewpoint. And it can be almost impossible to sort of step out of that and think critically, which is, of course, what you're called to do as a professor. As someone who's spent his adult life studying the internet and cybersecurity, what is your feeling about the internet in 2025?
Yeah, I was laughing because we did not have this conversation ahead of time, but I've had those exact thoughts.
Yeah.
And so maybe not so much about the internet as a whole, certainly social media. I have a 10-year-old daughter. She doesn't have a phone yet. She does have an iPad that has strict parental controls, no social media, nothing, and I don't know at what age I might allow her to do that. But I put a lot of thought into that, and I think the net impact of things like social media probably are negative. I think the net impact of the internet is still in the positive range where we are now, but it could very, at one point potentially become a net overall negative, in my opinion, because there's profound benefits to the connectedness of computer systems and allowing us to share with each other, and I think that is great. And if you hear Zuckerberg speak, he's always saying about how he created this network to bring people together and break down barriers and form communities. And I think it has. Social media absolutely has. The internet as a whole has done so even more, I believe. But at what cost? And at what point are we willing to say, is enough? The challenges, the potential negative implications of this are too much. That they do not outweigh those benefits anymore. I don't see Zuckerberg ever pulling the plug on Facebook. I don't see anyone purposely shutting down their $1 trillion valuation company. But should we? Perhaps there should be a pullback and some additional guardrails and things that we should place on what we are doing online, both in social media and even just online too. I mean, as you said, thinking back to our history, I have fond memories of going to Blockbuster, going to bookstores, and like that.
Blockbuster, wow, that's a blast from the past.
Yeah, this was, and I'm not going to say it was always a rosy experience, but my parents, me and my sister, we walk into Blockbuster. It was a family experience to go and pick out what movie we're going to watch, and we fought sometimes. But like that's a human thing, and we had emotion, and we ultimately learn to compromise and come together. And so some of those experiences we're not having anymore in a strictly online setting. And so I think it is important to, again, not just turn off all screens and say like, hey, let's live in the dark and unplug from the internet. But there's a lot of value in some of these, non-technologically driven activities. And it would be great to go back to, more of that.
So how could we foster this? Someone might immediately go to, say, government regulations, but I imagine that isn't going to really address the heart of what you're getting at, which is, frankly, a cultural change. So how do institutions, maybe like a church or other NGOs in our community, how do we as a society begin to mold the culture in a better way to restore some of those things that we've lost, some of the negatives of the internet?
I think doing things like this, absolutely. So having these conversations and just getting conversations started within communities organically certainly can help. You mentioned government, and broad government regulation of things can have some good and some bad, and it depends on the implementation. But one thing that I'm actually really curious to see how it will pan out, we're seeing this in our community, is the cell phone bans. And so in the state of Virginia, with K-12 schools, no cell phones, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. I think, again, like my child is kind of too young to be totally impacted by this, but I like that in some ways because then I'm not the bad father for not having a cell phone. When all the other friends and kids have
Dad, every other kid has it.
Exactly. And so when that then comes off and it's just hey, no one has it, then it becomes easier to find the other things to fill your time. Or when you're at school, heaven forbid, pay attention to the teacher and these types of things. And so I think, some level of regulation that is not so overbearing, I think can help. We're not out to ban these things and say, turn off the internet, no more phones, no more screens, but to have some guardrails and limitations on when and where, I think can be helpful to start the conversation. And then again, have more organic conversations in churches, in schools, I think will help. It'll be interesting to see generationally as well. I teach a lot of Gen Zs right now as college students. And obviously every generation has their own perspectives on things. And, you can't stereotype an entire set of people born between two years. But there is a lot of nostalgia in their preferences, and they are wanting things that are lower tech now. Like I can see with some of my students that they're not as chronically online as the millennial generation that I taught maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of go through, it'll be interesting to see if there are some ups and downs in kind of the perspectives that when their kids then are old enough to have phones or maybe have phones, then maybe they're not as likely to just put a phone in front of them. We'll see.
Interesting. Can you say a little bit about what you would recommend right now that I think especially parents, but really all people do to limit the amount of data that they're sharing? So, what are some of the guardrails? And you've already alluded to this a little bit with your own family, but what are some of the guardrails that we can put in place to be thoughtful about how we share our data?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll start with what we can do, like some of the things that I would think about myself, and then I'll get to kind of as parents. But I think it's just important to be mindful of what we are doing. It's so easy to fall into a mindless trap, and I fall into this too. Sitting after dinner at night, I'll open my phone and I'll start doom scrolling to some extent. And I'm not really on a lot of social media, but I find myself getting sucked in. And so being mindful of putting the devices down and, having basic things like no screens at the dinner table and just set these little goals to be in the moment and be living, life in real life, not through your screen. But when we are on our devices and screens, just to understand that, there is a cost to what we do. And so the more that we are putting into it, the more we're giving away for free. And for some of us, that's very engaging and enjoyable, and it's worth it. And so to share a lot on social media, I'm not saying that everyone should delete their social media accounts. If you have a close group of friends that now has moved into different areas, and this is a great way of maintaining those relationships, don't stop that. There's nothing wrong with that, because you are getting that benefit. So you are the product, but if you get the benefits directly, keep doing that. That's fine. And so all of us kind of have a different return on investment associated with that. So just be mindful about that and honest about what am I getting out of this experience. That's what I would do, personally, and that is what I do personally. And I actually don't have any social media accounts. I pretty much have gotten away from it because it just was not.
You're not a commerce professor influencer, huh?
I am not. We're banned from TikTok as a government employee. As a state employee, I can't use TikTok. But Reddit is about as close as I get to true social media in browsing some different things, and mostly that's like. It's a good source of local news, right? It's kind of get a pulse of what's going on in the community through different subreddits and things. From a parental perspective, this is where things get challenging. And again, I'm not an expert because my oldest is 10 and not quite at this stage yet. But let me back up. I have a 10-year-old and an almost 2-year-old, so a big age gap. And with our younger, we're trying to be a lot more mindful of like the screen as the babysitter.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that we were bad parents with my first child. I think she's fine. She's doing great in school. She's not addicted to the screen, but we probably let her be in front of the screen a little more than we would have otherwise liked to. And so we're being very mindful with that with our 2-year-old. And so far it's working well. But just being engaged and with all things, being a parent, just being approachable and having open conversations with your children so that you're aware of things and that they are aware of some of the risks of different things that they're doing, I think is really important. And again, an outright ban and saying no phone, no social media might not be the answer.
Right.
But do it in a responsible way, in ways that you can check in on them of what they're doing online and on their devices without being too obtrusive. I think is good, and building that relationship and trust with your children, I think, is probably the best approach.
I wonder too about maybe making arrangements with parents of friends in the peer group, right? So one thing that I've experienced, I have a 14-year-old daughter, 12-year-old son, 9-year-old son, is if you have one rule for one person in the group, then there's a lot of social pressure on them. They feel awkward about the situation and so forth. But if you can come up with an arrangement maybe with the parents to say, hey, at this party, we're not going to have our cell phones or leave your cell phones at home, then it makes it a lot less awkward, has been my experience with that. So something to consider maybe as well.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room, of course, with all things related to cybersecurity and the internet is AI, which is, of course, changing your work, I know, as a professor. How should we be interacting with AI? Should we be sharing all of our secrets with our AI therapist? What are your thoughts?
Well, so on the one hand, you can think, all right, I'm not actually talking with a human being, it's AI. And so some people feel much more comfortable opening up and pouring their secrets and pouring their soul out to them. Generally speaking, that's okay to do, but realize that with AI models, they're trained, especially like large language models, ChatGPT, generative AI models. They are trained to learn from everything that human beings have ever created, whether it's text, pictures, music, whatever. All of those things that human beings have created become an answer key of what it's like to be a human. And the AI companies are trying to make a computer that is human in every regard. So, artificial general intelligence, AGI, you may have heard, that's kind of the goal. And so when we interact with AI, just like when we interact with anything else or write a blog post or write an email, we are generating text that could funnel into training an AI in the future. And so general, personal information or what I'm feeling today after a hard day, it's not going to move the needle on what, this AI model says to everyone else. It's not like it's going to turn around and gossip to your neighbor about everything you just told it.
You won't believe what Chris told me.
Luckily, maybe one day, again, if we have, more advanced AI, it'll be more human-like in that regard. But it's also not a black box. A lot of people just think like, hey, I'm just talking to a computer and it's just going to go in there. Like it can be saved. It can be used in future training. And then also, just like we were talking about before, from the privacy perspective, there's the mental health side as well. And so we've seen the stories of people becoming too attached and getting too attached to having romantic feelings towards an AI model and things because they can be so lifelike. And they are also, this is a little bit of an aside, but all the AI models are trained to be quite sycophantic. I mean, they are agreeable. And so they will disagree with you if you push them to, but by default, they're going to reinforce whatever you put in and try to make you feel good as the customer. And so again, having that going in, knowing that is important.
And my understanding is that the newer model of ChatGPT is a little bit less sycophantic. Is that right?
They dialed it down.
Okay, because that has.
They know that is a problem, and so they're certainly dialing that down.
So how do you personally use AI, and what would you recommend in terms of online sharing and engagement with it?
So I use AI mostly in a professional setting, and so my use cases would be very specific to generating lesson plans and activities and helping to design ways of explaining complex technical topics to a non-technical audience in my classes. From a personal perspective, I don't really use it too much. Probably the most common use case might be I'm emailing one of my kids' teachers or principals, and can you change the tone to be a little bit less harsh, or like those types of things. I'm sure many of us have done that, and it's great at that. And so a lot of those use cases I think are totally benign, and I think this is a case of where AI can be extremely beneficial to society and helping us with some of those mundane things and just. Using it as a tool, and this is what I teach my students too, is using it as a tool to augment what we're trying to achieve, not automate what we're trying to achieve. And so once you let it totally automate your life and you are removed from the process, that's where things can get a little tricky. And obviously in labor markets and in the professional world, we can see that automation would lead to layoffs and things, and so that's an issue. But even in our personal lives, if we just completely go hands off and just put our full faith in the AI and let it automate, I'm sure you get lots of emails, maybe from people in the room or whatever. You wouldn't necessarily trust AI to automatically reply to those, right? But if it's a really sensitive subject and you're not sure how to respond, you can bounce ideas off of it. It could be a partner that you can just test ideas and see what it thinks, and sometimes opens up a perspective that you didn't consider before you reply or before you take another action. That's a form of augmentation.
I wonder, though, maybe we can dig into this a little bit, because if you send an email to somebody and it's not just sort of like a form letter, I imagine that the person thinks, maybe this is the wrong assumption, but they think that this is coming from you, right? This is how you expressed yourself. And I wonder if, the more we use AI to even change the tone and craft things and augment, there's a part of you in there, but it's not exactly you anymore. It is lacking maybe complete authenticity, if I can put it that way. Now this is where the line is unclear to me. I think this is kind of the root of my question. We bounce ideas off people all the time to help craft things. But at what point does it move from augmentation to automation or just something else? Like, you may have put information into it and contributed to it, but it's not your voice. It's not the way that you would express it. So when that principal receives the email from you, in some sense, they're not really communicating with you, actually. They're communicating with an AI. What's your thinking about that? And I don't know where the line is. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think about this a lot, specifically in the context of student assignments and deliverables.
Oh, yes, right, of course.
And so in my classes, I tend to default to not banning it outright. I think that it is a productive tool that is here to stay, and that it's, as someone who's training future business leaders, I should be developing positive habit and trying to let them practice with that. So I often struggle with okay, to what extent, and it's hard to say how many words were AI generated versus human and other things. But so I don't think about it in the personal setting quite as much, but you're absolutely right. The other thing I would add is, at some point then, if I'm using AI to help proofread and change, you're probably also doing it too. So now we have AIs just talking to each other,
right?
Which we don't want. Although if you read books and blogs and listen to some of these AI futurists, that actually is something that they want, and their perspective on things is, if we can kind of automate away all the mundane things about our lives, like getting a refund for a faulty product or all these things, it would free up time for us to be spending more time in rooms like this and having conversations and being human and being part of a community. I don't know how that works, but maybe that's another talk I can come back to in a couple months and we can dig into in more detail. But finding that balance is, I think, back to your original question, I think it's tough. And I personally would think, for things that are not quite so important, email is really not that important in the grand scheme of things, I don't care quite as much. So the needle might be a little bit more that if AI, the augmentation is more in those regards. But for things that really matter, I think that it is important to have more of that human connection. And again, that's what I'm trying to train my students, that it's if you're a consultant, which a lot of my future students will become consultants, and all you do is you look something up or interact with AI and get some solutions, then pitch that back to your client, why did they hire you in the first place?
Right.
And so instilling that, that you're not just a robot or you're not just someone that can type a computer screen, I think that's important. And so in those regards, then yes, a higher percentage of whatever is the final result needs to be human, because it's very important.
Yeah.
But it's a tough question.
Yeah. And I'll ask one more question. I think we'll open it up for the group's questions. Along these lines, one of the goals of Silicon Valley is transhumanism. In a nutshell, the idea that we can somehow transcend our current species, really, become something beyond a Homo sapien by the integration of artificial intelligence into our biology in some sort of seamless way. That seems to be the goal, and a lot is pushing in that direction. And of course, humans have always been augmenting themselves. You and I are both wearing glasses. That's an augmentation. But this does raise some profound issues then about what are we if we've integrated AI so much into ourselves? Can we really draw these distinctions even between the human and the artificial? How do you think about that? I mean, obviously that's the future. We're not there yet. But as you think about information and your interaction with AI and the digital in general, what are your musings on that?
Yeah, I run myself around in circles on this a lot, kind of reach a lot of dead ends, and it's a very philosophical, deep, question. And it really, to back up, I think, we've coined this term artificial intelligence, and so it's fake artificial, right? And intelligence. We have, as human beings, defined both of those words. Like we have defined what intelligence is as human beings. And so that's not necessarily an objective reality. And so we're modeling the computers to try to fit our impression of what intelligence is. And we hear about, artificial superintelligence and transcendence and things like that going beyond. We can't even fathom what would be beyond intelligence, because we've created what intelligence is. And, science fiction has thought of different things, and, but we have no idea where that would go. And so we're working towards these things. And if you look at the people who are working towards these things, it's very biased. We're not having necessarily the most diverse set of people influencing the direction of where, this is going. And so since we have defined what intelligence is, we're now entrusting a group of 4 or 5 companies led by 4 or 5 very powerful and rich human beings to help shape that future. That can be scary. Because
so in a way, they're defining what it means to be a human for us.
And what it means to be intelligent, to go beyond human. And so you're right. It's not like an immediate existential threat, but it's something that I think about. And, because we can read the news stories, they are gung-ho on trying to keep moving this forward. If I could end before we take a couple questions just on a more positive note.
Please.
We see in the news, the advancements of ChatGPT 5 and like the continued push with this, the majority of businesses and people in society, they're not necessarily worried about getting to that next step. We're still trying to figure out the mechanics of some of the implications of less powerful AI and just how we can integrate it in our lives. And so for the foreseeable future, I think that will consume our time. It's not necessarily an existential threat, that more attention is being paid at the lower levels of not the scary AI development, the more helpful AI development. I think a lot more time and effort than what appears in the media is going into figuring out ways and potential guardrails in place to keep kind of the general purpose use of AI in check.
Yeah, wonderful. What questions do we have for Chris? Yes, Bob.
I was thinking about your last question about humanity and sacrificing. And I remember I used to be in the mountains, I used to write homilies. And I see now where I go to Snapchat or whatever the hell it is, and say, writing a homily about this. And that. And it'll probably be long, because if you see a lot of stuff, I see stuff on YouTube that's AI generated, it's long. Aren't we sacrificing something beyond humanity, our spirituality? Will we be at a point where, hey, what's your interpretation of the book of Genesis? And some goober in there reading all this stuff, coming out with an interpretation that may be incorrect.
Can we trust the content from AI?
So here's the interesting thing. So you're right. I mean, AI hallucinates and it gets a lot of things wrong. But humans get a lot of things wrong too. And so our human And so this is where we are with, and I'm not saying this in defense of AI. I totally agree with your perspective that it is absolutely something that we need to make sure that if we are using this as a tool for augmentation, that we are fact checking and that we are, using this not to amplify misinformation or disinformation.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, when we think about like self-driving cars powered by AI, one car gets in one accident, it's national news.
Right.
Yet how many accidents happen just in Charlottesville alone? So we as human beings are willing to accept the fact that humans are fallible and make mistakes. But when the technology makes one mistake, we immediately want to distrust it and say it's garbage. And there's some merit to that, but we also have to realize that we make a lot of mistakes as humans as well. So, but to answer your question, yes, I think in using this, and this is where there's no watermark or anything that is clear. This person used AI, and if I don't cite it, if I don't tell people, but we just want to continue to be on our toes and critical that, hey, this could have a lot of mistakes in it, so we want to check.
When it's AI generated because they mispronounce names, or they'll say the baseball score was 1-9. You can tell that somebody had put in comment on this clip, and it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's dead wrong.
I imagine, though, we'll continue to see improvements.
It will get better,
fewer
and
and fewer
just
hallucinations.
Look at a year ago to now, the difference is pretty stark.
Yeah.
And again, not to derail, but the way in which a lot of these models, it's just a probability model of predicting the next in the sequence. And that's why it's wrong, because the next word in the sequence, it sounds cool. It sounds like, this should be right.
Yeah.
Right? This is a thing. This is a court case that probably existed at some way or some point. But it doesn't. And that's where we see the examples of, briefs being filed with these fictitious law.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Always use your critical thinking, right, Graham?
I work for a journalism company. This week, our company released a policy about AI, and part of it said reporters can use ChatGPT to write your first draft. That was kind of the big takeaway from it. But they said the final draft should be your work. And I imagine college students with access to ChatGPT working on papers, they can kind of do the same thing. Like, give me a first draft, and I'll work from there. Whereas back in the day, you had to sit down and figure out what's this first sentence going to be, and then go from there.
Yep.
As in academia, how are you sort of measuring? I mean, you touched on this. When you look at a paper, knowing that these tools are used, how do you sort of measure? Is somebody just using this tool effectively to help build something, or are they just good at prompts? And how do you sort of measure that in that setting?
Yeah, it's hard. So with all of my assignments and things, I will act like the lazy student and plug it into ChatGPT, and so I will know what the result would generally look like without critical thought and prompting. In some ways, advanced prompting and spending the time with the tool is part of what I want my students to develop. So I still want them to use their own voice, but I would want them to engage with it over and over again. And there's actually a recent research paper that came out. Some folks at MIT studied and looked at specifically drafting text and the way in which it was an fMRI study looking at how our brain works. And so one group had ChatGPT generate the first draft, and then they edited. Another group wrote, plugged it into ChatGPT, and then asked for improvements. And the group that started with their own work first fired up a lot more of their brain than the draft, because we anchor on the draft. And so when AI creates that first draft, we produce less cognitive effort to try to make it better. And I shared this study with my students, and I can share it with you if you'd like to. But the approach is still better to start, as hard as it might be, get something down and give that as a framework, and then help use a tool to augment and make that better. The final product will likely be better, and our brains get more exercise because of it. And so those are some of the use cases I'm trying to develop in my students. But it's impossible to know. Any of the tools to check whether this was generated with AI, they don't work. It's not enough that I could accuse a student of cheating. So I don't even bother with them. Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that the whole point, we might step back. What was the point of writing to begin with?
Yeah.
It was for people to come up with, at least this kind of writing you're talking about, Graham, a clear narrative, organizing data in a way that helps frame things. It's an interpretation to some degree. If you have AI do that, what is the reporter doing? Other than just changing some words and some sentence structure. But at the end of the day, like, that's the whole point of writing, right? So to your point, I mean, that makes complete sense that cognitively we would show that people really aren't thinking that much if all they're doing is editing a first draft.
And it depends on experience too.
Yeah.
And so like if you have no experience as a journalist, maybe starting with a draft of saying like GPT, like, hey, write me an article on this topic in the style of Bob Woodward or something like you could learn from that, right?
Yeah.
But as you actually have experience, it is better to start with yourself and then get the feedback.
Julia, yeah.
So I'm very AI. I'm a lawyer. I'm very, and we are like not allowed to use it. I'm trying to find that. But so you were talking about using this augment email and then not knowing like who, you're kind of like the talking to. So all that we've been talking about is that written product, obviously. You can't instant it into your brain. And I work remotely for a decent law firm, and there's really, more and more days in office. And the return to office push is all about office culture, and a lot of it is focused on the junior assistants, first, second, third years. And it's all about mentoring them. You're talking about consultants. This is all focused on junior people. Obviously, you can't have AI in your brain when you're interacting with other people. So I'm worried and curious about how you're talking to your students about if all you're doing is relying on AI to soften your tone or give it prompts about how to modify. You have first draft about how you wrote an email and you were too harsh or it wasn't the right way to talk to somebody, and you use it as a crutch to help you. But you're in front of people, and the whole focus on you as a younger person is interacting with people, learning how to work in a professional environment. How low is this actually be a person? And all the older people like me are being forced to come to the office to mentor you, and you have no.
And you don't want to.
No.
No, that's a good point. Absolutely. And so, again, not to scare everyone, but Elon Musk Neuralink is actually working to do what you said, to implant the chip that gives AI directly into our brains, which I don't think is a great idea. But the advice that I have given my students, and again, I'm fortunate enough to teach here at UVA, and we have excellent students that tend to go on to high-profile consulting jobs and banking jobs and things. But the best way to kind of future-proof your career from an AI perspective is to go into those fields that rely a lot on the relational capital. Because we are not at a point where AI is going to automate away the relational capital. Right. And so creative work, collaborative work, client-facing work are all these things that building up great AI skills is not going to get you to partner, right? And to these things. And so instilling that on the student that, there's not a shortcut in those types of fields through AI, I think is important. And I agree. I think that there is some value in that relationship building aspect of, I still like flexibility. I don't think you have to be in the office 50 hours a week to do a good job. But when you're there to embrace that and not just think this is taking time away from productive work that I could be back on AI doing things, I think it's an important office culture to continue to promote.
Yes, Carol.
I want to get back to the data collecting.
Yeah.
You talked about scrolling and how much time you spent. I had some experiences on Zoom with a group of friends where we would talk about e-bikes. Then I would get ads for e-bikes in my Facebook. How dangerous is voice? Should we be careful what we're saying on the phone or on Zoom?
This is a long.
It's the secret police listening in.
So a lot of apps, especially if it's a mobile app, if it's Apple, for example, you have to give it permission to access your microphone, right? So Zoom you do because you're doing that. But Instagram also requires it, because if you want to record a reel, it has to pick up your voice or whatever. And so once you grant that permission, then it's like, well, can they listen all the time? Or is it only when I'm recording something, or only when I'm, on a Zoom session, and things like that? So I think absolutely voice is another avenue that they can extract information from us, especially when it's a Zoom call, because obviously we are saying things and we need our microphones on for that. I don't want to say that you should always be whispering to your partners around the house because your phone is there and afraid of it spying on you, but it is possible.
You are being recorded right now, though, I will tell you.
Well, and things like Alexa devices and the smart devices in our homes, anything that is set up to respond to our voice prompt, technically the microphone has to be on at all points to pick up on that prompt. And so, we can limit that and not have an Alexa device in every single room of our house. And, sometimes, maybe we do leave the phone in another room or other things. But it is possible that voice is being picked up and fed into the algorithms to then give you more of. Yes.
Wonderful.
It does happen.
How safe is WhatsApp to use as a phone calling or message?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So WhatsApp, Signal, some of these encrypted forms of communication, they are 100% safe and effective unless you have access to the physical device. Okay, so if I am using some kind of encrypted communication device, then even the company so WhatsApp is owned by Meta, even Meta cannot access what was said or typed through those platforms. It's always encrypted. They do not have an encryption key. So it's an effective way of cutting them out in the process. It is not 100% fail-safe, because if you have the device itself, the device has the decryption key. So because you have to be able to read the message in plain text, or you have to be able to hear someone else's actual voice. And so it cuts out the ability for anyone to intercept the message or the company to be able to read and see what is being talked about. But if we do get the device itself, we could see what was done.
So, one quick question for him.
This has been fascinating. Thank you. I don't even know how to spell AI. Is there a teaching app or something 101 that just can give me some basics to learn?
At the risk of being scary, ask AI to do it. And I'm not joking. I mean, if you just open up, we go to chat.gpt.com or I think that's what it is. Yeah. And just open up a session for free, and just say hey, I'm new to this. What are some possible ways that I could interact with you, or things that I could do? How might you be able to help me? It's going to provide some scary good recommendations.
Emphasis on scary.
And then there's some books. So if you're looking at some guidance of how it kind of fits within overall life and things like that. There's some authors that have newsletters, Substacks, or books that they're publishing about some of these things. I tend to read more in the education space. So someone like Ethan Mollick at UPenn is really good at talking about the societal implications of AI, specifically in education, but it goes outside of education as well. So there's some thinkers I could give you some recommendations on.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for being with us today and for this great conversation. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.